To say that the War of Wonders was chaotic, is to say nothing. In those days, almost no one understood how to fight. Even now it is not so obvious, but more on that later. As you can see, after a while, War of Wonders began to acquire characteristic features that are still used today, ranged phalanx in defense and more mixed proportions, with fewer ranged amounts sometimes. Let's go back to our time. As mixed proportions become relevant again, many started using 4-2-4, 3-2-5, 4-4-2 and many other proportions. If you wish, you can find a table that says which proportion to use in a given situation, but there is a problem, it doesn't always work. We know 3-2-5 is better than 4-2-4, but in some situations this is not the case. Look at this Titan, look at his T5 count, even his proportion is better than that of the attacker, but he barely won. How is this possible? Imagine that both opponents have 4-2-4 proportions and ranged phalanges. In such situation, everything will be decided by whose ranged will die first. Our task is to ensure that our ranged were killed a bit earlier than enemies. Take a look at this report. Proportions are quite similar, but we had more ranged in defense, so enemies' range died earlier, after which enemies' cavalry began to receive damage from our troops, while after the death of our range, damage goes to both our cavalry and infantry. That's why 3-2-5 is stronger than 4-2-4. Since we use less infantry in 3-2-5 proportion, we spend more time killing enemies ranged, which is why our ranged die faster, and our cavalry begins to take damage. And as we know, infantry and cavalry not so effective against cavalry, since enemy has a few ranged left. Not perfect, but still a good example of how it works. The difference in losses is huge. So, we figured out why 3-2-5 is better than 4-2-4, it's time to go back to the report, when 3-2-5 almost lost against 4-2-4, and find out why this happened. In many situations when something goes wrong, there are two factors. It was only during the editing process that I realized what factor influenced the outcome of the battle. In part, this can be called luck. Duan's familiars hit Palong's infantry, because of which he had to spend more time killing Duan's ranged, because of which Palong's range died a bit earlier, and everything went according to the scenario that I told you about. Due to the fact that Palong's range died faster, only Palong's cavalry took damage from Duan's troops, while Duan lost both cavalry and infantry. As for the second factor, it's the general strength of the rally. These are rally captain's stats, the number of sigils and T5, and so on. Sometimes you can lose with a better proportion, and that's okay. Now, let's talk about 4-4-2 proportion, and why this proportion is better than 3-2-5, at least if both sides use a ranged phalanx. The power of 4-4-2 proportion is that in this proportion a lot of infantry is used, which will quickly kill the enemy's ranged, and a lot of ranged, which, after killing enemies ranged, will attack enemy's cavalry and deal massive damage. Take a look at this report. Flotus used 4-4-2 proportion against Hell's 3-2-5 proportion. Hell's range died rather quickly, while part of Flotus's ranged survived and prevented Hell's cavalry from reaching their potential. Flotus's ranged killed Hell's cavalry. So, the conclusion: 4-4-2 proportion is a good choice if the enemy has few infantry, and infantry stats. It's logical to assume that if the 4-4-2 proportion deals a lot of damage against ranged and cavalry, then it's possible to reduce the number of ranged and cavalry, in favor of the infantry, which is most effective against proportions with a large number of infantry and range, like 4-4-2, 9-9-2 and others. And so, we are back to 4-2-4 proportion. Since there are more infantry in 5-2-3 proportion than in 4-2-4, then the range in 4-2-4 proportion die faster, after which the cavalry begins to take damage, due to which the 4-2-4 proportion will win. So, we figured out what proportion and why should be used in a given situation. It is important to note that all this will work in equal conditions, same rally captain's stats, equal number of T5, sigils, same gear, jewels and so on. Imagine a battle of 4-2-4 proportions. Imagine Dwan is the enemy rally captain. Imagine that you have the same accounts, heroes, sigils and T5, and all you can change is the gear. Imagine that you can equip any champion gear. What would you choose? So, we came to the fact that not only proportion is important, but also the gear. We can use 4-2-4 proportion, but use mainly infantry, cavalry or range gear. Everything will depend on what proportion the enemy is using. Let's go back to the situation with Dwan. We remember that in the battle of proportions with a low amount of range, our goal is to lose our range a bit earlier, then enemy will lose their range. It turns out that to defeat Dwan, we can use champion's cavalry main armor boots, and leave all the rest of gear the same as Dwan's. It turns out that our infantry attack will decrease, due to which we will spend more time killing enemies' range, and lose faster our ranged. You know what will happen next? Both sides will have only infantry and cavalry, but we will only lose in cavalry, and Dwan, both cavalry and infantry. Victory is ours. If we use 4-2-4 proportion, then against the same proportion, we can use mainly cavalry gear. If the enemy uses 3-2-5 proportion, we can try to use cavalry range gear, and put a cavalry phalanx, and against 4-4-2 proportion, an infantry phalanx, and mainly infantry gear will be effective. Yes, the outcome of the battle depends not only on the proportion, not only on the gear, but also on the formation. I can't give an exact advice about the number of T5, obviously, if you and your opponent have the same everything, except number of D5, and you have a bit less D5, you can try to copy proportions of the opponent, using them against him. At least this should work in proportions with a small amount of range. And one more thing is, the heroes, 2-2-1 heroes, the most popular lineup of heroes, 2 infantry, 2 range, and 1 cavalry. Partly, I associate this choice with the fact that the infantry is a rather harmless type of troops. Look, if someone attacked us with a full range, there is a chance that after killing half of our infantry, our cavalry will start taking damage, which is bad for us. If someone attacked us with full cavalry, then there is a chance that after the death of half of our ranged, we will begin to lose our infantry, which is also bad for us. But if someone attacks us with full infantry, then even if only 2 of 4 squads of our cavalry will die, then our infantry will be attacked, not the range. From this point of view, infantry attacks or rallies are the least dangerous, which means that it will be enough to use only 1 cavalry hero. But at the same time, you can use different compositions of heroes, depending on what proportion, and against what proportion you will use it. I would not advise doing this without enough information about enemy rally captain and his liked proportions, but in addition to the 2-2-1 heroes, 1-2-2 heroes, 1 infantry, 2 range, and 2 cavalry, are also popular for the most popular, range phalanx. It all depends on the situation, but sometimes it makes sense. For example, when the enemy is weaker, no matter why, the number of T5, gear or something else, he can defeat us due to the mirror of our proportion. Therefore, with 1-2-2 heroes, the damage of our infantry is reduced, and the damage of cavalry is increased, which will help us successfully defend wonders, at least if both sides use proportions with about 20% of the range. Proportions, gear, formations, heroes, number of T5, we see all this, and we can try to calculate everything in advance in order to win. But we don't know what talents the enemy rally captain uses, what sigils, jewels, and so on. You should always remember that there may be some difference in stats. You must in practice find a way to counter any rally captain. At least, I hope that now, you understand better how to do it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, or a desire to discuss proportions or something else, I welcome your comments. English is not my main language, so I hope I was able to convey my thoughts well enough. Have a nice day.